Welcome everyone to our event on carbon removal in Japan. My name is Jason Growler at AirMyners. The intro music was, I thought, apropos, Lovers in Japan by Coldplay, because not only is it about Japan, but Coldplay also as a musical group bought carbon removal credits. So with that in mind, we have seen a increasing degree of interest in the country of Japan for carbon removal, in particular with the advent of the GX League and some initial steps at potentially a compliance market for carbon credits in the country. This is an important development that we wanted to discuss in one of our AirMyners forums. To that end, we have an excellent panel of people who have either worked with startups in Japan, are Japanese firms, or have undertaken projects in Japan. And to moderate that, we have Chen from CDR.FYI, who wrote an outstanding blog post on the at the start of the GX League. So with that in mind, we're going to have our typical event as we do, with a panel discussion for 35-40 minutes. And then we'll have a Q&A after that, where we'll take your questions. Feel free to ask them in the chat, and we will make every attempt to get to them in the last 15 or 20 minutes of the show. And then after that, I'll have some announcements, and then we'll be out. As we normally do in AirMyners, I'll be hanging on for another 30 minutes afterwards for people to sit down, discuss, stop recording, and talk about the event so that we can get to know each other, not just know of each other. So with that, I am going to yield the floor to Chen. So take it away, Chen.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, AirMyners, for hosting this discussion. Hi, everyone. My name is Chen. I am the head of content and community at CDR.FYI. I'm based in Taiwan. Today, very excited for the speakers to get into the discussion of what is happening in Japan. And a quick, maybe in addition to what Jason has said, I think what is most exciting is the central to the GX League in Japan, which is a part of the green transformation strategy aimed at achieving net zero, is the GX ETS, which launched in April 2023. And this year in April, the GX League announced that they will include carbon dioxide removals from BECS, DECS, and coastal blue carbon, in addition to CCUS for the potential ETS or compliance framework. And companies can use up to 5% of these credits towards their greenhouse gas emissions, so which prompted our discussion today. So before we jump into the discussions, why don't we have the speakers introduce themselves? We'll go with Yuki, Chris, and Adam. So Yuki?
Great, thank you, Tank. Hi, everyone. I'm Yuki Sekiguchi. I help climate tech startups navigate early-stage commercialization challenges and also help large corporates create climate businesses. In the CDR sector, I lead go-to-market at a direct air capture startup, AirMyne, MYNE, maybe you can see. And I'm also a founder of the Japanese climate tech community. My background is in the tech ecosystem in Japan and the US, and as well as startups and corporates, and bridging those different worlds together. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Chris, go ahead.
Sorry, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Takigawa. I'm manager CDR at Mitsubishi Corporation. I work on CDR projects, stacks, spikers, enhanced rock weathering, pretty much everything. We work on these projects globally. I also lead the procurement for NextGen, which is the buyer's facility for CDR, and really looking forward for the crowd today. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Baylin-Stern. I'm policy and engagement lead at the direct air capture technology developer Carbon Engineering. My focus here is really on policy development and engagement with governments, international organizations, NGOs, all with the goal of helping to develop the markets and compliance markets in particular for carbon removal and direct air capture technologies. My background before joining carbon engineering about 3 years ago is from the International Energy Agency, where I focused on long-term scenario analysis and was part of the CCUS team for a couple of years. And really pleased to be here today.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Yuki, Chris, and Adam. So let's get started. Chris, I think you are, the closest to the actions in the CDR space in Japan. I was wondering if you can give us a quick sense of what is the state of CDR in Japan. What does the landscape look like in terms of project development? And maybe Yuki could talk about startup ecosystem, and Adam, you can talk about what the general interest parties, what they're thinking is their characteristics and such. So Chris.
Yeah, thanks. I think overall CDR is just starting in Japan, but starting in a very good way. I think nobody knew about CDR. That definition is not clear in Japan yet, but since last year, the government started talking about CDR, especially around direct air capture, and I think all of a sudden, all the corporates are now talking about CDR, how they can include us in their emission removals, but also be part of that ecosystem, either being an investor, project developer, creating new startups, so on. So it's a really exciting moment today that we're seeing so much hype about the discussion around CDR in Japan. And again, you mentioned about the GX ETS. GX stands for the Green Transformation, which is the to-be compliant scheme in Japan, but it's now talking about usage of CDR from foreign countries to offset the emissions in Japan. So a lot of excitement. I won't talk about the other topics. I'll pass it on to Yuki. But lastly, just on the project development side, so we work on projects. We're more of a global company, so we don't really work on a Japanese project. This is kind of how do I say, straightforward, because we're a small island, so we're kind of restricted to do large projects in Japan. It's quite easy for us to look into other geologies, such as the US or other regions. But it's really exciting. We're now actually working on not just investments, but actual project level discussions in these countries. Yeah. So I'll pass it on to Yuki. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to mention, not just the CDR startup ecosystem, but also the big company side. So in terms of the CDR startups in Japan, there isn't much of the ecosystem yet. There are a few CDR startups in Japan, like DAC and other things, but it's very small set. And actually, many of the technologies in the big corporation R&D department or some research institution, not necessarily commercializing, it's more like a research project, but that's there. But in terms of excitement, I totally echo what the Chris said. But just this past year, the interest in Japan and outside looking into Japan had grown so much. It's really significantly. And even I think it was maybe just a few months ago, I just met this team, just started a sustainability business group in Japan. And they said their first kind of focus area is the CDR, although their business has nothing to do with CDR. So that is the kind of level of the interest they have. And I've been hearing a range of interest in learning about the CDR and also creating business in the CDR sector, in the CDR ecosystem. And the most active one, the serious one, are just like Mitsubishi, so more of a conglomerates, and also oil and gas. Those are very interested, and then they are actively developing projects in the US and Canada. But I will note one thing, that I haven't sensed strong demand for buying removal credits yet. And I believe overall, I think it is still the education and also figuring out the strategy at this moment.
And I guess to add, kind of from our company's perspective, and largely echoing, I think, comments before me, is just, I think, generally a lot of interest inside and outside of government is what we've perceived. in CDR, and of course in direct air capture, which is what we're focused on in Japan, and very rapidly growing interest as well in the market. I know kind of on the policy front, I'm sure we'll get into it a bit more later, so we can park that. But on the commercial front, already seeing a lot of early interest, in particular from some of the hardest to decarbonize sectors. So thinking here about aviation, maritime, where we've seen the airline ANA having done an initial purchase of 30,000 tons of removal from our first direct air capture and storage project, Stratos, which is shown behind me, and then also earlier in 2023, the Next Chen initiative, so joint venture that I'm sure Chris can offer more on between Mitsubishi South Pole, announced advanced purchase of I think it was 200,000 tons from carbon removal project, and I'm sure there's been more since. And one of the kind of founding customers of that included Mitsui O.S.K. Lines, so major Japanese shipping company. So already seeing some early very strong interest in carbon removal from these hard to abate sectors in Japan, and of course early days and only growing interest.
Thank you. Yeah, I would echo what Yuki said, that yeah, it is true that, you know, even at CDR.FYI, we've seen increased inquiries from Japanese firms, not just not just the conglomerates, but also from consulting firms looking into CDR and wanting to learn more and get more data on what is happening around the world. And, you know, as Chris said, I think the world, Japan is the world is looking at Japan as to with lots of interest on what is happening in carbon management. And I think Japan is also looking at the world, what is happening, and trying to sort of synthesize plans and strategies. So I was wondering, you know, in your opinion, how are policies and regulatory developments, both in Japan and globally, how is it shaping the CDR landscape? And more importantly, into our discussion, what are the implications of the inclusions of CDR into ETS for the global CDR market? Adam, maybe we start with you. You're closer to the policy front.
For sure, yeah. No, it's a great question. I think from our point of view, the inclusion of CDR, and I think it was four pathways specifically into this first voluntary phase of the emissions trading system in Japan, the GX League, was a huge development and extremely encouraging. And from the point of view of our company, which is focused today on development of the first commercial large-scale DAC projects that are in Texas, so the Stratos project behind me, that's expected to come online the middle of next year. So really kind of getting to the final stages of the construction for these first trains that you see behind me, and then already a second project in planning in South Texas that'll have the capacity of up to 30 megatons a year. So really big projects, and focusing on really deploying it at the lowest possible cost. I think the recognition that credits can be generated and from projects located overseas is a really huge development. Really reflects kind of a recognition of some of the unique natures of carbon removal, which is that the atmosphere is shared, and in many senses it makes sense to do projects where the right mix of features for any particular form of CDR exists that allow for the lowest cost and deployment at really kind of climate relevant scales. So another kind of key aspect of that policy development that really makes a lot of sense is trying to put in measures that allow that ensure that there is Japanese involvement in the projects, which of course makes sense, and is something that kind of we're keen to work with. And then I think the final point on that is really just while it's a great development, inclusion of overseas removed within this first phase of the emissions trading system, it's great and necessary, but not sufficient to really create a business case for high integrity carbon removal. So I think, yeah, to sum it up, I mean, definitely seeing Japan being a real leader in terms of CDR policy, in terms of DAC policy, in another number of other ways as well, measures beyond the ETS that are in place or that we know are in development. Happy to turn it over to a panelist if there's anything to add. I know you're likely have some insights beyond that are interesting to add.
Yeah, maybe I can step in. Thanks, Adam. First of all, I think I want to be we want to be clear that the current eligible DAX bikers or other CDR credits in the ETS is a voluntary phase. So there's no actual commitment for the large corporates to buy offsets as of today. They have no penalty as of today. So it's rather a voluntary scheme. The compliance kicks in 26. That was recently announced by the government, but we're not quite sure yet how that new framework will be established. So we're not yet sure if DAX will still be eligible under the new compliance system. We're hopeful that it should be, it would be, but let's see how that goes. I think what I would like to mention is that Tank mentioned there's a lot of interest outside of Japan toward Japan itself. I think that interest comes from a seller's perspective. So they see Japan becoming a large demand pool. But from a Japanese point of view, we're interested to become a supplier to the market, not just actual credits, but technology-wise. I think this is the huge gap that we're seeing. It's good to create a new ecosystem, but that's, I think, the thing that we need to solve. So like Adam mentioned, in order to import a carbon credit, a DAX credit from the US, there has to be a plus 20% equity participation of a Japanese corporate, or it has to be a Japanese technology provided to that project. Otherwise, there's no, it's simply going to be a cost for the Japanese economy. So trying to bridge this gap is something that we're all trying to figure out in Japan as of today in terms of policy. And I also mentioned that it's not just the ETS. There's actually a lot of policy in Japan to support the technologies in Japan. It's more R&D focused, but there's a lot of interest in, for example, concrete storage like mineralization or enhanced rock weathering. They're not very vocal. They're not very public in the media because it's all in Japanese. But there's actually a lot of subsidies, a lot of support from multiple governments or industries backing up these technologies to actually create an industry here. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just a few points. Yeah, I totally echo what the Adam and Chris said. Yeah, so as a startup, as a U.S. startup, it's U.S. and international other startup. This is a very exciting opportunity. Finally, new market is starting, and also ETS. It's definitely exciting for sure, but definitely the expectation about the timing and volume and cost price, that kind of thing should be checked. But certainly it is exciting. And also, one thing I would like to highlight again is that this GX ETS, this initiative is by the METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, I think. So this is first and foremost, it's an economic policy. It's not an environmental policy. So the idea is to make Japanese companies competitive in the new green economies. That's why that requirement for the partnership with Japanese companies exists.
For sure, and I might add just on that topic and talking about kind of the role of kind of Japanese corporate participation even in international projects. So of course, super important to think through that it can take a number of forms. And one great example we have in the Stratos project that's, I think, worth mentioning is one of the major components, an air separation unit that's used in the project, is provided by a subsidiary of Nippon Sanso Holdings Company. So already kind of showing, of course, the multiple forms of Japanese technology that are relevant for carbon removal projects, for DAC projects, regardless of their location. So yeah, that's just looking at, of course, the equivalent and supply chain elements of participation in projects, but already a good example that we have.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I through my research, what I found most interesting was that the world is looking at Japan as the buyer's market, but really the setup, the GX League and sort of the trajectory that the METI wants to set the Japanese corporation up is really to become not just the buyer, but also a technology supplier and project financer and partners. So that's what got me really interested and really excited about the GX League. And so Chris, then you talked about providing Japanese company providing technologies for carbon dioxide removal suppliers around the world. On the ground, which CDR technology or method do you see is gaining the most traction, or has is probably more advanced or more developed locally, and how does that align with or differs from sort of the global trends?
Yeah, thanks. I don't see there's a huge difference compared to the other countries. I think DAC is something very considered sexy. A lot of DAC companies out here. But what's interesting, it's not, Yuki mentioned this, but it's not the startup ecosystem. There are a lot of startups, but it's more about the large corporates developing their own technology. So I belong to the METI's DAC working group. There's a handful of large corporate players there that they also participate, but they're all providers of DAC technologies. They have in-house DAC technologies. This might be something slightly different from what I see outside of Japan. But other technologies are also very much now being followed. For example, we already have a biochar methodology under our J credit mechanism. There's a huge academia network for enhanced rock weathering. There was a conference with more than 200 people joining. So you can see there's actually a lot of people in Japan working on CDR. Bikers is something that we don't hear a lot. I think it's probably because it's quite difficult to do such project in Japan, but let's see what happens. There are some pulp and paper industries now being involved in all these discussions, so on. So that may be something we see more advanced. Lastly, I see there's some comments around ocean technology in the questionnaires. I think that's quite interesting. You nailed it. I think we're limited of land, but we're not limited in terms of the oceans. We probably have the best coastal area. So in the future, definitely we see a huge potential in the ocean alkalinity space or other type of technology that can use the ocean to capture CO2. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So, we want to get your perspective on what are the primary drivers for Japanese companies that are engaging in CDR today, both in the corporations, and I think, like Chris, you said, I think a lot of corporations that are interested are looking inwards first to see where in their value chains could CDR come in, and so how might CDR suppliers, buyers, or investors globally collaborate with these Japanese stakeholders? And goes out to all the speakers here on this question. So,
Or maybe then I can start, I guess. So I see it as a mostly, so like the interest right now is, well, at least in my sphere, most of the interests are like as creating new business opportunities. And even for some, it is kind of survival strategy. So the Japanese companies are very much interested in investing in or working with CDR startups. And the current requirement we just talked about that encourages collaboration between the Japanese corporates and the startups field, so that the Japanese companies can be competitive in the new economy. So for CDR startup, I think it is actually a win-win situation. As a startup, we need big company collaboration to deploy the technology at scale. So international startups should consider Japanese companies as projects and solution partners to deploy the project and bring the credits to Japanese market and beyond, and rather than just seeing them as a buyers.
Yeah, I think I mean another element kind of driving the interest from Japanese companies in CDR is I mean, of course, at the core, decarbonization and the role that CDR we know needs to play to complement emissions reductions and meet net zero objectives that are of course from government and companies increasingly being put into place. One kind of more concrete example of a policy that's already driving some of the interest, I think, is within the aviation sector, where the CORSIA system, so the offsetting system that the International Civil Aviation Organization runs, aimed at supporting decarbonization and driving decarbonization of international aviation globally, is set to come into force in just 2 years, and already we're kind of in the voluntary phase. Japan has signed on. It's one of the countries that has signed on to this voluntary phase. And so even though these policies are not yet, we're not in this kind of mandatory phase, and even though there's quite a range of domestic policies that drive aviation decarbonization today, already we're seeing airlines in Japan and outside of Japan respond to this, both in their pursuit of lower carbon fuels, sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, but also an increasing recognition of the role that carbon removal needs to play to support kind of a cost-effective path to net zero, to complement SAF, which is lower carbon but not zero carbon, generally speaking. So I think kind of impending aviation sector regulations definitely driving companies, and in Japan, it's very encouraging to see emerging aviation decarbonization and SAF policies from the Aviation Authority and also from METI. I think generally transport decarbonization markets are one of the areas where carbon removal sees early markets. These are some hard to abate, costly to abate sectors where carbon removal certainly can provide a cost-effective solution, and already today where we have some good policy precedents. If we look at things like the California low carbon fuel standard, the BC low carbon fuel standard, where I'm based in Vancouver, that actually include direct air capture to storage as a pathway to directly help decarbonize the local the fuels used locally. So all to say, transport markets and aviation sectors are definitely already driving some Japanese companies, and as mentioned earlier, one example of this is ANA Airlines, who really became the first airline to directly procure direct air capture credits from Carbon Engineering and 1.5, which is the company, our sister company developing the projects.
Chris, do you have anything to add, or can you speak sort of from your perspective at Mitsubishi? As Mitsubishi is certainly a leader in the CDR space, and what is driving this interest or this strategies in carbon dioxide removal?
Yeah, I think it was covered very well, but I think it's becoming more of that business interest. I think a lot of companies are interested to be part of this ecosystem, either investor, project developer, supplier of their technology. Yeah, we recently hosted a Japanese DAX roundtable. We had 20 plus companies participate. All of them were very much curious, still learning how they can be part of this. But I think the gap is that they don't know what the DAC industry or this bikers industry or any other CDR industries is requesting in terms of technologies. So I think if there is a communication here, that will be something very much helpful. The buyer side, I think, is also definitely is an interest, but Japan in general has just started buying CDR, like carbon credits itself. So most companies don't even know about quality yet. So that's a discussion that's going to happen a lot during this year, next year, especially when the compliance kicks in, because they don't have other pathway. So I think that's we have to be patient to see how that develops. But there are some leaders like ANA or Mitsubishi K-Line, like Adam mentioned, that are already taking a huge step forward to drive the hard-to-abate sector decarbonization. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's all very new, sort of to the Japanese companies, what CDR is, and yeah, and like you said, Chris, I think education is it's a big important part to scale CDR, and I think that is globally as well. So I'm curious to know what other key challenges or opportunities do you see in scaling CDR in Japan, and is there any, and how does it differ from other markets?
Yeah, maybe I can take that one. I think, again, the largest challenge in Japan is that we're restricted in terms of land, resource, in terms of energy, for example, pore space. So we can't, I won't say we can't, but it's very difficult to develop a project, any type of CDR project in Japan. So when you don't have that opportunity in your country, it's quite difficult to develop technology or create a business case. I think that's something that's very much holding up a lot of companies to participate. But the good side is that I think there's a lot of companies actually stepping out of Japan, doing that challenge in the US or other regions where there's actually more potential of projects. I'll also mention it's good that we're seeing there's different pathways in CDR. So it's not just the DAX or bikers. So we have enhanced rock weathering, we have ocean alkalinity, we have other technologies, and these might be some areas that can be deployed in Japan. So there's not yet a large business case in Japan, but I think this will be something that will be growing eventually. Yeah.
So happy to offer a bit more. I mean, I think, yeah, Chris certainly touched on kind of the challenges related to, to the requirements for the land availability requirements, some of the energy requirements, and some of the limitations that exist there. So really trying to ensure that that the right mix of climate pathways and economic incentives exist to ensure that you can develop these CDR solutions at large scale, low cost, and finding the locations that really are optimal from an economic point of view. And then I guess just to add is, of course, and I think I saw a question already come in on this, and it's just talking about, the price gap between the signals we're seeing in existing carbon markets and policy and what we know the costs for carbon removal, the range that we know that they're going to fall into. So really ensuring that there's this complementary demand focused policy that really supports the demand creation kind of for the CDR credits. And I think, without getting into details, looking in Japan, we already have some nice examples of how the country's approaching hydrogen, ammonia, that probably can provide some insights.
Yeah, so Yuki, you don't have anything to add. I think we will go ahead and answer some of the audience questions.
Maybe just quickly, just the from the supplier's point of view. So it's not inherent to Japanese market necessarily, but like that talking about this quality and all those transparency is a very, very important topic. And the sustainability team in Japan is even less resourced than many of the American companies. And also, in addition to that, there is the the notion of importing CDR credit from other countries. So there's a physical distance gap that the buyers cannot really see the project. And in addition to that, there is a language barrier. And this is a very nascent field. There's a lot of nuance and negotiation. It's very technical. It's a quite a bit hurdle to pass. So for suppliers, we need to make business case as well as supporting negotiation, all those things, and the transparency along with it.
Thank you. All right, so let's go to audience Q&A. Jason, we'll let you.
Sure. Thank you for the discussion so far. A lot of questions in the chat, which is, as you might say, quite sugoi. Let's start off with Phil Keithel. Phil.
Let's see, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm curious as to the co-benefit side of it. And we did submit actually to the Tokyo GX program this year. We're not selected, but I had a chance to research the fisheries industry in Tokyo, in Japan. If there is a seafood eating country in the world, it's probably Japan, number one. And yet I found that seafood sufficiency is now below 60% for the island of Japan. It was over 100%, of course, 20 years ago. And so for marine CDR, some of the technology, including the upwelling technology that we're pursuing, that is a potential co-benefit to improve fisheries catch and replenish the stocks, and also hopefully re-employ some of the fishermen who have fallen on hard times. So is there a path forward to focus on the co-benefits and have the CDR be an important benefit, but not necessarily the first benefit? So, i.e., have fisheries be the prime benefit, somehow have that be what is sold to whomever, the companies or whatever. That's my question for the panel.
Maybe I can quickly, well, thanks for the question. My point of view, I think definitely yes. I think the challenge of CDR is obviously the cost. So it's extremely pricey. There's no reason why we should be buying this just from a cost perspective. So I think that's the challenge from a very early buyer's country. If there is like a business case or a benefit outside of that to justify that cost, I think that's definitely something that will be interesting. But again, if that comes with a significant cost, I think that will be quite challenging. So it's really a balance of the cost and how you can overcome that cost with a strategic perspective, including co-benefits. Yeah.
Okay, great. Next is going to go to Bjorn's question about Article 6.4, hot off the presses from COP29.
Hey everyone, thanks for hosting the panel. I think the GX ETS is a great precedent for how compliance markets with CDR could work and how it can integrate with other frameworks such as the Article 6.4 that's just been negotiated at COP29. So I'm wondering if there's any implications from the recent updates there.
You mean if there is a connection between the Article 6? Yeah. Yes. My understanding currently there is none, but theoretically, if there is a corresponding adjustment framework, it should be accepted under the ETS. Currently accepts the JCM, which is a corresponding adjustment scheme, but that's a Japanese national scheme. But I don't see why the government will not accept a wider framework like the Article 6. But let's see. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Like the key, and yeah, I guess it's being written as we, some of the developments are happening as we speak. Of course, at COP29, and even in the lead up to COP29, there was already kind of news that some of the documents from Article 6.4, so this central kind of global market for carbon credits under the UNFCCC. I think one of the key issues is really just from the CDR point of view is making sure CDR DAC is in scope, in addition to kind of a lot of other design aspects that are critical but related to integrity of credits and how the actual mechanism works in practice for countries, for projects, for organizations. But hopefully good news to come.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up is Francis.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks to the panel. Really helpful. Maybe I want to pick up on a point Chris just raised. So obviously pricing is the elephant in every compliance conversation. What are the forecasts for near-term and long-term pricing for these credits under the compliance mechanisms in Japan?
Thanks. So it's an allowance trading scheme. So we first don't know yet what that allowance price will be. That will be probably decided during 25-26 year time frame. Let's see. We're hearing there's also going to be a penalty for not meeting these requirements. So that price will also be, I think, something that will be helpful to navigate the prices. There's no price predictions yet for credits yet, but just in general, in Japan, the J credits is relatively high priced, even like in the avoidance reduction credits. They're like, let's say $20-$30 per ton CDR. So I see a space where a CDR might be priced not too far from these other type of credits compared to the other national countries. Yeah. So I'm not giving specific numbers here, but yeah, we have to wait for the allowance scheme to come. Yeah.
Okay, next, Leopold Schwartz-Schutte.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the panel. Yeah, my name is Leopold from Stellar Mineral Storage. I'm curious about the current state of in situ mineralization in Japan. Are there any active projects underway? What's the government stance on this technology, and also kind of the industry?
We're a basalt country, so potentially we have a lot of underground storage for in situ mineralization. That said, I think the current priority is to understand the potential of CCS itself. So the government subsidies or effort as of today is more towards CCS. So I believe in situ is kind of not the priority yet, but I would agree that there should be a lot of potential being a volcanic island. Yeah.
I think the government, some of the government members have like visit Iceland and other places to understand, right? So that could be happening.
All right, great. Next up is Leo Park. Oh. From Capture 6, Leo?
Oh, sorry, Jason. I just got off the elevator.
Oh.
I'm here, but I'm on the move, so I'll go like off camera. So thank you so much again, Jason, for hosting this event, and then good to see familiar faces on the panel. So thank you very much for sharing your insight. Yeah, I think my biggest curiosity, and this also applies to not only Japan, but also in Korea, where there is a compliance like emissions trading scheme, but where carbon credits are being traded like at $10 a ton. So I'm trying to understand how Japan will be trying to address this like huge funding gap between engineered CDR credits versus this like offset or the usual carbon credits, and then what would be the incentive for Japanese corporates to buy much more expensive engineered CDR credits?
Yeah, thanks, Leo. And I think that's a great question, and thank you for it. And I mean, probably two ways of looking at it. One being the looking at the voluntary market and voluntary actors that are increasingly focused on ensuring that carbon removal solutions, credits, offsets that they are using fare well when it comes to things like durability, things like additionality risks, reversal risks, all of these dimensions. And so there's increasing scrutiny of how corporates are using that, and of course all of that pushes higher integrity solutions towards the front of the pack in terms of what corporates are interested in. But ultimately, policy and compliance markets need to value those design elements. So ensuring that the pathways that are in regulated markets and the regulations and the standards that exist to certify any credits that are generated reflect those dimensions and accordingly ensure that they're in scope of markets. But ultimately, there's also kind of a need for policies to help provide targeted support for such measures that are high integrity. So, there's a whole range of instruments that governments can use, and different governments around the world will have different preferred approaches. I know one example in Japan, looking at policies now for clean hydrogen and ammonia, are contracts for difference, where there's a subsidy that covers the gap in price between low carbon versions of those products and references that are used in the market. So, imported LNG, for example, in the case of hydrogen. So yeah, really trying to, above all, ensure that policies correspond to the integrity of the solutions.
Great. Okay, next up, we've got Chaitanya from Topovanam Biochar.
Hi panel, this is Chaitanya. Want to know about biochar carbon removal partnerships outside Japan.
So could you maybe elaborate on that? Like how are you thinking about investment of Japanese firms in biochar projects outside of Japan, or how are you thinking about that?
It might be something like a project financing or partnership, something like more than 20% type of things.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think a lot of corporates have a global footprint and own a lot of biomass waste. So a lot of companies are thinking about how to utilize that waste. So they're either doing their own project development. It can be a biochar or woody biomass or any type of biomass approach. But also, these companies are looking. I hear some companies may be looking for investments into the project levels or the corporate levels outside of Japan. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so project level, they might be interesting on a project level, according to you. Am I right?
I think both. Like there may be companies that are looking for project level investments, or the companies that will be looking into more top start of the ecosystem investments. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Glenn Meyerowitz has a question that I think is on a lot of people's minds right now.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I really appreciate everyone being here. I guess I'll ask the question that I guess nobody else wanted to ask yet. With the results of the recent U.S. election and the potential change in policy framework here, I'm based in the U.S., and potential decrease in U.S. federal government support for direct air capture and other carbon removal projects, how do you see, if at all, Japan and GX League corporations stepping up to fill the gap and to take a larger role in industrial decarbonization?
Okay, big question.
Maybe a quick one from me. My feeling is that Japan is more a follower of the US government policy. So personally, I don't know much other industrial areas where Japan tried to take over such a role for a certain industry. I might be wrong, but especially when it becomes to decarbonization, I think that is quite challenging. I hope there will be some efforts that the government can make, but I don't see all of a sudden just because there's a new Trump administration, all of a suddenly Japan will be heavily investing in this area. But that said, the positive side is that we already have a large budget in Japan called the GX budget. That it's a significant investment budget for the Japanese government to invest in any type of decarb technology in Japan. So that is something that may be standing out. The GX ETS is also something that is already differing. So that may be something that already existed, but have more interest outside of Japan. Yeah.
Thank you. Jason, can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Please.
Chris, follow-up question, I guess specifically for you, feel free not to answer. So I know that Mitsubishi has, of course, been involved with some direct air capture hub work here in the United States. Do you think that a change, so federal funding dramatically helps to de-risk the investments that corporations have to put in order to prove out this early TRL technology. That's why I think we're all excited about, and we have been, about the DAC Hub programs. If that funding slows down or changes in quantity, would you see that potentially have an impact on Mitsubishi's willingness to engage with this early TRL technology? Or do you think that that's something that's critical to support, 2040, 2050 sustainability goals? Yeah, again, feel free not to answer.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just say, obviously, that's a really big subsidy from the government. So that will be a critical decision-making moment, whether we receive it or not. Yeah, that's all I can say.
Fair enough.
I appreciate
also,
it.
Also to think about U.S. policy changes, there was a bill that dropped in the U.S. Senate today, bipartisan by both Democrat and a Republican, to increase the direct air capture 45Q tax credit from $180 to $250. So we shall see. We shall see.
Yeah, I think that, just to add, I think like that's a great point, Jason. Is just that it's a period of transition, so not time to speculate on policy changes, but just kind of worth re-emphasizing that, in particular, looking at direct air capture carbon management technologies, it's a space had historically bipartisan support. So I know kind of from our company's perspective, kind of there's this continued dedication to the carbon management strategy we have.
Great.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing about this US election thing. So, of course, I don't know what's cooking in the Japanese government side, but I certainly like to see that Japan rise up and lead even further, perhaps mandating removal credits as portion of offset, or like even government procurement. I don't know what's going to happen, but anything to iterate on creating healthy market that could even work for the hard-to-abate sector. I think that would be fantastic.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. Sorry we couldn't get to everything today, but unfortunately, we were at the very tail end of our scheduled programming. So I just want to say thank you, Tank, for moderating the discussion today. Thank you, Chris and Yuki and Adam, for being such outstanding panelists. And thank you to our audience for being so attentive and asking, again, really insightful, interesting questions. Some housekeeping items before we go out. The panelist contact info is there if you want to get in touch with anyone today who was a speaker. Feel free to email from that. Also, our next event is next Wednesday, talking about COP29s, which was something that we certainly discussed today, starting at 7 a.m. Pacific on Wednesday, the 27th. So there's that. Finally, we have a post-event survey. We'd love to hear in AirMyners what we did well, what we didn't do so well, so that we can improve and provide high quality programming to you and our community. So we can't do it without you. Any questions or comments or concerns you have about our events, please let us know as much as possible. So with that, I just want to say arigatou gozaimasu. And thank you once again to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you at an event in the future.